or I don't know, different policies on tourism, or different policies on economic investment, or etc. That we don't separate out the regional layers from the local layers or the state layer. So everybody has to work together. Okay, so in the details, I can go to examples. Maybe that's the best way. Okay. For example, so maybe it's more practical to show this. This is a mapping we did in Perth, Scotland. Perth is 50,000 inhabitants in Scotland. It's got a kind of medieval kind of configuration of place. It's encircled by walls, as you can imagine, as you can see maybe here from the map, and it's got a river there, etc. Now, 3 years ago, Perth, the museum people wanted to build a brand new museum. And they also wanted a brand new concert hall. They also wanted maybe a big theatre as well. So they got the money from the Scottish executive. As you know now, Scotland is independent and has a parliament, so the parliament has the capacity to decide on cultural matters. So the parliament decided to allocate resources to the concert hall, and they built a concert hall. Fine. 2 or 3 years ago, the concert hall was already a little bit in trouble because of lack of funding for running programs and content. Okay, so we got a big building, new building, fantastic. I don't know how many £1 million they invested in it, but it was running into trouble immediately, 3 years down the line. And the municipality, the city, also wanted now to rebuild the museum, a brand new building, so another investment of money. Now, they called us in and they asked us to come up with a strategy for this museum quarter or something. And from the beginning we said, we're not going to do a strategy for the museum quarter. If you want us, we can do a mapping, and then at the end of the mapping, we will see what we come up with. But so we said to the politicians, the mayor, etc., if you are prepared to be open about this process, we might come up with some ideas. So we did some mapping, and here, what you see here is the traditional historic buildings. You have many more in your town, in your city centre. These are really big buildings in Perth. They are like 19th century Victorian buildings, and they are like big cultural institutions as well. In a town of 50,000 inhabitants. So this is quite a critical mass of heritage and buildings, etc. So we put this on our map as a cultural resource. And we said, fantastic, this is definitely a good resource. But then, as we were doing our deep hanging out and drinking lots of whiskey and talking to people, etc., for like 3 months or something, okay, not every day drinking whiskey. Yeah. So what we discovered is that, for example, if you look at all this street here with the dots in it, these are independent shops. This is a critical mass of small shops that were like craft shops, they were like artistic shops, they were like shops where people made, I don't know, hats, bags, clothing, books, they sold books, etc., etc. So there was a critical mass of at least, I would say, 50 to 60 shops, independent shops. And we thought, this is as important as the heritage. So we said to the mayor, this is as important as the heritage. And already we had a very strange reaction from the politicians, etc. They said, yeah, we know we have independent shops, but they are good for the tourists. Nobody wants to go there. Okay. But because they had no policy for those shops. They had no vision for how to use that resource. Then, of course, we saw the red dots also are the places where the young people congregate. And these places are in the open air. Why? Because young people had no place to meet. Despite of all these heritage buildings, despite of all these shops, you had only 3 places where the young people were congregating outside in the cold, smoking dope or jumping about, dancing or making music or something in the open air. And in Scotland it gets cold also, just like here, in the winter. So we put this also on the map as a resource. As a resource. And, okay, you can already imagine this. Now, here, the yellow one, this comes the kind of last blow to, as far as the media and the politicians were concerned. These yellow bits are empty shops. Because of the crisis and the downturn, already 3 or 4 years ago, you could see in the city, from the city center, lots of shops had closed down. And of course the big supermarkets, chains, etc., etc. So there were lots of empty shops. And what we said, hey, you've got a massive resource here. You've got the old buildings, you've got the young people there, you've got the independent shops, and you've got these empty shops. And we were then talking to local organizations, and we discovered that there were at least 120 individual voluntary sector organizations, including artists, including elderly people organizations, including sports organizations, educational institutions who had no space to perform, to do their activities. They had no buildings, nothing. So when faced with this mapping, we just looked at the empty shops and we said, those empty shops have to go to the people who need space. That was the first thing we said. But in so doing, I don't know if you are a planner, if there are planners here or something, a whole hell broke loose, in fact, because the regulations, the health and safety, the planning things, the licensing, etc. So there was no vision within this city as to how to use their resources. And then we said to the museum people, hey guys, you're the museum, you can do temporary museums in the shops. Temporary museums in the shops. Of course, that didn't go down well either. But you get the drift. You get the drift of what happens if you do a mapping, what happens if you do an analysis of the potential resources, what happens if you start off with the local needs, expectations, aspirations, and so on. Okay. So here we did a place mind mapping about the shops, and of course you come up with ideas of how you can reuse the shops if you brainstorm, etc. No? Young people can use them to make music, to do artists can use them, but also makers can use them, craft people can use them temporarily, the elderly people organizations can use them, and so on. Okay, so you get the picture. Here is another example. This is another town in northern Italy. This is much earlier than Perth, and this is 1993 or 4. Mantua is near Verona in the north of Italy. Again, 40,000 inhabitants, 50,000 inhabitants. At the time when they asked us to do something there, how am I doing with time? Close down now? I don't want to... Have I run over time? Or?
No, it's okay.
Okay, so when they asked us to go there, they asked us to do a tourism plan, because Mantua had the problem of the one-day tourists. So they had tourists that went there for a day, left a lot of rubbish behind, visited all the monuments fast, etc. on a coach, and then they went to Verona and Venice and forgot about Mantua. So they wanted us to do a tourism plan to attract more tourists. And we said, you don't need to attract more tourists, you need to rethink the way you present this city. And we did a lot of mapping and thinking, and we discovered that there were two things. There were something like 500 small entrepreneurs located in the area of Mantua and the province around there. The small entrepreneurs, family-run firms who are doing anything, cheese, shoes, bags, anything. So these are like 500 entrepreneurs sitting there, producing wealth and wanting to get involved in culture, but never felt that the city was giving them the opportunity. Why? Because the existing cultural policy was the arts. Yes? Okay, so if you are an entrepreneur who is producing cheese and being very successful, the arts are something you don't normally do. Okay, this is in Italy. I don't know you guys, but okay, this was in Italy. So we have this kind of resource, and we immediately put those people there as a resource on the same level as the heritage. on the same level as the heritage. We said Mantua has the heritage, but it also has this kind of network of entrepreneurs. Why don't we use them?